So let's take a look at JSON parsing. So what I have here is some test data, and these are test JSON objects just in a standard access log here. And what we're going to do is we're going to parse these. So there's going to be a few steps to this, but let's just take this from a blank parser, and then we'll go through all of the steps that we need to do to successfully parse this. So let's just press test here. And the first thing that we notice is the lines are fragmented. So what we need to do is we need to group this message together so it can be interpreted as one object. So the way to do that is to use line groupers. And if you are unfamiliar with line groupers, I suggest taking a look at the previous video on line groupers. We go through all of the multi-line message options. So what line groupers actually have, there are two pieces to a line grouper, and that's the start pattern and then the continuation pattern. So let's just paste this stanza here. All right, and we're going to group this message together. So in the previous video, I explained the continue through method, as does the documentation. We also talked about the halt before. The one that we're gonna do now is halt with. We could probably use different ones, but I think it'd be useful to demonstrate this one. So halt with does exactly what it sounds like. It's going to first find the start pattern, and then it's going to group until it sees the halt with pattern, and then it's going to stop at that line. So what we want to do is define the start pattern and then have it continue through and then define the end pattern. And then that's going to be one group. And then it'll just continue through the full log line. So the start pattern that we're going to do is this open bracket. So regular expression starts with open bracket, and then the halt with is going to be the closed bracket. So starts with closed bracket. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to pull this into a variable called JSON, and let's see what that does. Okay, so we have the full line message, and then we have JSON, and it's the full message just being thrown into a single object named JSON, or a single key named JSON, and then we have the message here. So this is actually a good thing to, it actually gets kind of tricky reading this, but if you use this message field to get your bearings, this message field is going to contain the raw log message for what the parser is interpreting. So the next thing that we want to do is, so we have JSON here, but we want to use our built-in function to actually go through this data and break it out into key value pairs. So we can do that. The way that we're going to do that is, let's just go to our documentation. Scroll to the top. Let's look at URL and JSON parsing. And you could take a look at this syntax here. So this is going to give you some built-in functions, and one of them is parse. And you have different parsing patterns that you could define. One of which is JSON. So we're just going to do parse equals JSON. So we'll do JSON and then parse equals JSON. And then let's see what that does. Okay, so now we have more fields. So this is the raw log message. Format 1 is true. This is from the ID. And then we have all of these, like HTTP request ID, request method, path. Those are here. Appended to them is the string JSON. And the reason for this is because we're naming this variable JSON. So one thing we could do to get rid of that prefix is just to remove the prefix there. And if we press test, then now we have really nice clean variables here. So it looks like we're done with some of the JSON piece. The next thing that I would do is I would look through these to make sure everything is lining up properly and make sure that these are coming in okay. And I'll give you some ideas of what to actually look for. So the first thing you want to look for, especially if there's a timestamp present, is the presence of a timestamp field, like the full filled timestamp. But what we have here is time. So this is a critical piece. We need to actually bring a field named timestamp in so the system can interpret that field and assign the timestamp within Scalar to reflect the timestamp in your log and not the timestamp of ingestion. If you don't have a timestamp field, then despite the fact that a timestamp might be in your log line, Scalar is not going to parse it. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to do a rewrite rule. And if you're unaware of rewrite rules, take a look at the video named Attributes and Rewrites. But let's take a look at rewrites here. So we're just going to paste this object into our format. Okay, so now we have time coming in. So that's going to be the name of the field. That's going to be the input. The output is going to be timestamp. And then we're just going to look at the entire field. And then we're going to do group 0. So now if you look, we have this time value still here, and then we have timestamp here. And what we can see is that it was parsed as of 126 minutes ago. So this means that the system interpreted it as a timestamp, and this is the time. So it looks like we're good there. Note that if you do rewrites, that there's no way to delete the field the input field. If you would like to not bring this in, I'll show you a method that we're going to use for another field here to not bring that in. So now that we have a timestamp, that was the first thing that I took a look at. The next thing that I want to look for is the severity field. And we can see here that we have a log level or level. And this is the syntax that I believe like an ALK stack would use. They use like log level. But in Scalar, you want to define this value as severity. And the reason for this is because Scalar actually is going to take debug or error or whatever the actual severity is and turn it into an integer value. So for instance, if you have errors and you want to look for like 400 and 500 errors, you can do severity is greater than or equal to 4, and then it'll pull 4 and 500s. So it's important to bring severity in as that. So that's the next rewrite that we're going to write. So we're just going to add another object here. And do the same method. So we're going to bring level in. And the output is going to be severity. And then we'll just leave the match and the replace because we're grabbing the whole line. And then we'll test. And one thing that I've noticed too, it's better to test incrementally as opposed to doing a bunch of changes and then just testing, because then it makes it harder to figure out where your things broke. But so now we have severity coming in, and yeah, so now we have a severity value coming in as debug. And the next thing that I notice is that there's a message field here. one thing to note is that message is actually a reserved field. So what happened was this gets renamed as message underscore. One thing that I actually could do too is just bring another format in that's going to process message prior to the JSON parsing. So if I put this in above, because it evaluates top-down sequentially, and I paste message here, or if I just paste this whole line, and then let's escape our quotes. So what we have here is literally just looking for this particular key here that is message. This this message key. What we can do is we could scan the line using this wildcard, n number of wildcards, until it sees this literal here. And then basically what we want to do is assign whatever this is to the actual value. So let's say we want to name that details. We can do that. So now let's test this. Note that we still have message underscore here. If we wanted to remove that, then we can do something else here. And that's using a blacklist, an attribute blacklist. So let's look for that blacklist. And what an attribute blacklist is going to do is it's basically looking for that key, and those are the keys that are not going to be interpreted by the parser. Since we're interpreting it here, we don't want to interpret it here. So what we'll do is just do attribute blacklist and then message. And you could do a bunch of them if you wanted. So let's say I wanted to do like message and let's do session. So we'll bring session in and message, and let's see what happens here. So now we have our fields named details coming in, which is request started. And then we have message. We're disregarding that other message. The message underscore is gone. As is the field session. So now if we test this, we can see that the message underscore is gone because we've added it to the blacklist and we're processing it prior to. So what we can see is now that we have applied the attribute blacklist, the message underscore should be gone because it's being disregarded and being processed prior to when we process the JSON. And then we see session gone, and this is just to show kind of how these work, how you can make a list, because this is just a regular expression. You could also do stuff like that. And this would probably get rid of everything that matched that. But as you can see, these are just regular expressions, and we're just typing the literal message here. So that's how the blacklist actually works. The next thing that I see here, and I believe this is the last thing, and then our parser is pretty much perfect. And the last thing that I see here is we have this HTTP request path, and this contains URL parameters. And if you want to parse out these URL parameters, there's a really simple way to do that. So one thing that we can do is let's just pre-process that. Similar technique to what we did before with message. Let's just do the same thing with the parameters. So in this case, let's paste the key here. And for the value, we can just leave that blank actually, and we're just going to do parse equals URI. So we're going to leave off the prefix, and then we're just going to parse the parameters. So let's take a look here. And then here we go. So we have the A parameter that was 1, 2, 3. The B parameter, which is 2, 3, 4. And then we're processing the full path here, which gets processed here. You could also add this to the blacklist if you wanted to as well. That would disregard bringing this one in. So that is how I would think about parsing a JSON object with multiple lines where rewrites are necessary, and order is also going to be considered as well. So the next example that we're going to go through is going to be XML. So we're going to do the same thing, but instead of using this parser here, just like our built-in JSON parser, we're going to write this from scratch.